As you breathe in the freezing and cumbersome afternoon air, a chilly wind crawls up your nostrils and painfully scrapes its way in. As you twitch around with your fingers in the pockets of your warm, wool-fitted jacket, you slowly feel your pores contracting from the breeze. With the horizon faded and engulfed in the claustrophobic and bleak gray fog, you walk on the cold concrete that seems to extend indefinitely. For every step, you feel the force of the pavement pushing against your feet more and more as you continue inching into the mist. Comfort? Well, that's nowhere to be found, except for the warmth that remains on the inside of your jacket that's slowly but surely also slipping your grasp. For how much longer will this last? This feeling with no signs of retreat, layering on top of the already dreadful melancholy, making you reach for an escape like never before, until it finally reaches a point. A point that you can't quite put your finger on. This feeling of uncertainty, followed by what can only be described as serenity, long past the concern and doubt of your surroundings, tranquility. You feel as everything you've thought up to this point serves no purpose of questioning. The troubled state of you being uncertain of what's to come is now a straight but narrow path, like an angry ocean turned to still, running water. Where there are no stimuli for the eye, the eerie subconscious takes over. Dulled senses with fogged out surroundings, it leaves the body utterly no choice but to create and envision its own comfort. An illusion that the body and mind slip into, based solely on previous experiences and thoughts, nowhere in reach from that of sane mind. Encased in a purgatory with the windows shut, with no desire to peek out from within its boundaries. Merely a product of a harsh and gloomful environment that you have no choice in to accept, no matter how disappointing the outcome may be, or what ultimately lies beyond. Until a sense is regained, and you start questioning whether or not you are in a position of choosing what happens next. Do you have any say in the matter? Is it really up to you to open the door and to find out where it may lead you, or to even close it shut? Or are you again nothing but a product, and the environment has already decided the outcome? You sit and ponder for what feels like seconds, turn to days, turn to years, and eventually you lose track.
In my restless dreams, I see that town, Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you.
James Sunderland gazes longingly into the mirror. Staring deeply into his own eyes, he slowly grazes his hand along his face, reaching for any affirmation that would prove that this state of trance he's in is real. Lost but ultimately decided, James walks towards the exit and leaves the bathroom. The harsh, cold wind and the chilling surroundings immediately set him into a protective, albeit determined footing. As he walks up to a ledge overseeing the beautiful landscape of the hills of the town, he reminisces of the letter once more. The letter being written by James's wife Mary, who supposedly passed away 3 years ago due to an illness. The main roads to the town are barred off with cold and rusty fences and gates. Beyond the fences, complete darkness lies, as if telling James that what lies beyond this fence is an incomprehensible horror. As James comes to the ultimate realization that he's not turning back, he walks down a cold, concrete set of stairs, leading down towards a claustrophobic and narrow forest path, perfectly encapsulating James's mental descent. He continues dragging his feet throughout the seemingly never-ending path. The wind blowing against his face, with its brawn increasing for each step he takes, serves as a final warning to James to turn back, but he's already traversed so much of the path that turning around now seems even harder than to just continue down the path he's already taken. James continues on, where he notices that he's no longer stood on a pathway in a forest, but instead on a cemetery. He inches deeper and deeper into the ever-growing fog until a silhouette of a woman appears.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
No,
was
it's
just...
okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
A quiet, somber woman seemingly on edge, judging by the first interaction between her and James. Stammering and oddly structuring her sentences adds to depict this uncertainty even more. Just like in James's case with the search of his wife, the unnamed woman is looking for her own mother. James asks for directions to the town. While traversing through the same thick fog, the only visual change he notices is the way the surrounding ground slowly goes from the green and natural with wooden picket fences to the visceral gray and black concrete, with overflowing trash cans that are knocked over and rusty metal fences slowly encumbering his surroundings, until he finally enters the town and he's completely surrounded by the cold and empty concrete buildings, accompanied only by the choking fog. James finds the town to be completely abandoned, with the entrances to all buildings completely inaccessible, whether being boarded off or simply locked. James continues on while the town slowly becomes more and more disturbing. Trails of blood on the road with a shadowy figure lurking in the fog. When he finally confronts it, the frightfulness of the town only grows stronger. The creature emerges in the dark underpass and reveals itself to be a humanoid-like abomination covered in blood, with deep cuts, scars, and bruises. Its arms permanently tethered to its torso, like they were sewed on, screeching, twitching, as if it's in extreme unbearable pain, drooling and spitting a vomit-inducing stench, inching faster and faster towards James until he instinctively reacts in self-defense and bludgeons the creature with a sharp, broken wooden plank. He continues through the streets of the town, coming across more and more of these sickly, nightmarish monsters, occupying almost every corner of every road. He comes across an apartment complex. The cold silence accompanying the dark corridors and the broken down inside of the apartments wraps around James. The familiarity of a normal apartment corridor should be somewhat of a safe haven, but in this town, far from it. Eerie sounds, only what could be described as the cries of abandoned children and painful adult moans, echo the corridors of the apartments. Ridden with more dark figures that at a first glance resemble humans, but they get more disturbing and otherworldly the closer James approaches them. All possible familiarity of such a location completely eliminated by this unfitting ambience. Running around as if trapped in a labyrinth in a nightmare, James rushes from door to door, trying to find anything that may help him get closer to his final destination. He uses everything of his newfound strange possessions to get through any obstructed areas. With no guidance and no knowledge of where his wife may be, he tries to come up with any sane, logical solutions that may help him traverse further through this forsaken town. These logical solutions that would lead nowhere in a normal everyday, which further leads to the questioning of James's own sanity and understanding of reality. The structure of the apartments itself is full of anomalies, such as the elevator door that leads not to an elevator but rather to a ledge, which James can access another apartment building through, further encapsulating the chaotic atmosphere and complexion of Silent Hill. While wandering through the claustrophobic corridors of the apartment complex, he enters room 307. Utterly shocked by what he sees, he instinctively draws out his newly acquired handgun and unleashes a flurry of bullets towards the horrifying creature with a gritty and bloody metal pyramid for a head, but to no avail. This monstrosity slowly limps away from the closet and out of the room. When James leaves, the creature is nowhere to be seen. James has no choice other than to ignore the horrifying events that just occurred and goes on. As he stressfully sprints through the rundown corridors where the nightmarish belches and screeches of the monsters echo the rooms, he hears what up to now is the most normal and natural sound that resembles that of another person. He finds a young man named Eddie, slouched over a toilet in one of these torn down apartment rooms, vomiting. He exchanges in a small, albeit discouraging conversation with the young man. James doesn't really get anything important out of their encounter, and realizing that Eddie's unhelpful conversing won't really get him anywhere, and he redirects his focus towards his original objective. He heads off and continues traversing through the claustrophobic and deteriorated hallways of the apartments, and finally reaches the final stairway. He quickly tries to turn around and leave through the door he just entered. Realizing that the door behind him is locked, it leaves him no choice than to face this monstrosity head on. He unloads clip after clip into the pyramid head. This room is yet the most visceral James has been in. Confined space with deteriorated walls covered in cracks and scratches and a rotten wooden flooring. James tries to keep distance from the creature as it staggeringly swings its giant ponderous blade. The deafening sirens slowly overpowering the loud gunshots from James's handgun until it suddenly retreats and walks head-on into the puddle of water that filled up the entire stairway. Only having one way to go, James leaves the area by walking in the same direction as the creature, with it, at the end, nowhere to be seen. He finally reaches the outside. An overwhelming feeling of serenity drops on James as he's finally out of the horrifying, dark, and throat-clenching apartments. As he starts walking towards Rosewater Park, he meets a child. She mentions Mary's name and runs off, and he continues on the same path. He walks, on edge, awaiting his next encounter with another creature. Although what he meets next puzzles him completely. He meets Maria, a woman that has an uncanny resemblance to his late wife. Her face, her voice, just her
Hair and clothes are different.
Her name is Maria.
James asks the woman if she's seen Mary.
Didn't you say she died?
Oh yeah, 3 years ago.
Almost as if he had to recollect his thoughts and convince himself that her death did actually occur. Maria asks, almost seductively, if she can tag along with James, seeing as how the town is overrun by monsters. They both walk across the town's foggy roads until they reach the bowling alley. James enters and meets Eddie for the second time, eating pizza and acting completely unfazed by the events occurring in the town. He's accompanied by the child, and again, when James enters, she runs right off. James learns that her name is Laura, and leaves the bowling alley where Maria is, and they both go out looking for the girl. The duo see the young girl enter Brookhaven Hospital, and they both follow shortly after. The hospital is dark and run down, the shallow hallways with discolored tiles having degraded notes either written by the patients or the staff pinned on the walls. Unnatural and industrial sounds behind doors and walls create a sense of dread in James and Maria whilst they traverse the cold hospital. They find what seem to be nurses and monsters, shrieking and screaming, attacking them both with wrench pipes. The rooms are littered with rusted and destroyed medical equipment with writings of unhinged patients on paper notes scattered across desks. All floors and rooms of the hospital look similar enough, which helps James memorize the interior and creates a sense of familiarity, helping him traverse these rooms with less and less effort for each room he enters. With Laura nowhere to be seen, Maria lays down in one of the patient rooms, telling James that she feels exhausted. James continues looking for the young girl. He reaches the rooftop of the hospital. After finding some scattered notebooks and diaries, he walks up to a fence on the top of the building. James lands in the solitary confinement ward, which was previously inaccessible. The padded rooms are covered in blood and markings from mentally deteriorated patients. After some exploring, he finally finds Laura, innocently playing with plush toys in a decayed and ruined hospital room with rusty tables and fenced-off windows. James remarks that this isn't a place for a kid, and that he could not believe that she hasn't gotten a scratch on her yet, into which she replies with, "Why should she?" As if the horrific surroundings are of no remarkable notice to her. They both walk out of the room and continue down a corridor with Laura saying that she has a note from Mary that she got some time ago. Laura tricks James to enter one of the other hospital rooms where she locks him in as a sort of revenge for him yelling at her earlier, simply as an innocent gesture from a young child. On the other side of the door, however, James faces 3 monsters, hospital patients wrapped in bed sheets and metal bed frames hanging from the ceiling, shrieking with pain for each gunshot that James unloads into them. He fights off the monsters until he suddenly starts hearing the same sirens heard before in his encounter with the pyramid monster. His vision starts blurring out until he finally loses consciousness, with nothing remaining other than the deafening sirens. He sees himself being taken out on a trolley, with Mary's voice repeating his name over and over again, until he finally finds himself fully conscious again in an outside area of the hospital. But when he goes inside, something is very, very off. The familiarity James had developed at the hospital is now completely gone. The place that was already run down and disheveled from before is now even more horrific, in a state that can only be described as something on the other side of reality. The walls are drenched in blood, rusty fences in places they weren't before, previously open doors are now locked, and previously locked doors are now accessible. Furniture is in and out of place, a sporadic chaos that can only be described as a nightmare. He goes down to the basement where he sees a hole behind the closet, when suddenly,
James!
Maria enters the room.
I've never been so scared in my whole life! You couldn't care less about me, could you?
These words enter James's mind and linger on for too long. There's something reminiscent about these exact words, but James can't put a finger on it. Brushing it off, James and Maria leave the basement and continue looking for Laura. They traverse the horrific nightmarish hospital until they come across a long corridor, and suddenly the previous seen pyramid monster is back. It chases James and Maria through the seemingly infinite corridor. Seeing as James can't harm the monster, they both clench their teeth and run as fast as they can as the monstrosity is chasing them. Right as James enters an elevator at the end of the corridor, the elevator doors suddenly close. Maria reaches out her helpless hand and screams James's name as he witnesses her being violently slashed by the monster's gigantic blade, instantly piercing and killing her. The elevator slowly rises up, and James is mortified. Sitting on the elevator floor, completely distraught, he decides to ultimately push himself through this miserable nightmare and find the person he originally came to Silent Hill for, Mary. The outside is now a pitch black void. The previously suffocating fog that was now seems as something comforting compared to the current environment. James carries on through the abandoned streets of the town, making his way to Silent Hill Historical Society, a museum of sorts. James finds paintings and other artifacts depicting various figures, including the terrifying Pyramid Head. In one of the rooms, James finds a huge, gaping hole in the wall, leading to a long staircase that seems to descend indefinitely, almost like a stairway leading straight to hell. The loud mechanical screams of some unknown object or creature fill up the entire stairway. The farther down James goes, the louder and more frequent the loud noise gets, calling, almost pleading for James to continue down, but at the same time everything in his body and mind, or what's left of it, tells him to turn around. He finds himself again in a suffocatingly narrow corridor with disgusting concrete walls and sharp, cold metallic prison bars seemingly out of place. He reaches a hole with seemingly no end and decides that it's better to leap into it instead of turning around now. After all, he has made it this far, and nothing could make him go back after everything he's been through. Falling into some sewers, he explores the area. He comes across rooms that have literally no sensible structure whatsoever, with gates leading to holes and doors on sides of both walls. James leaps into another hole, descending further down this chaotic nightmare. Reaching the bottom and again, miraculously surviving, he meets a familiar face, although something is very off. He again meets Eddie. Eddie has always been, in a way, pretty nonchalant when it comes to his surroundings.
Killing a person ain't no big deal.
This time, however, he's utterly unhinged, waving his handgun around and spitting out the truth of his past. He explains to James that he's killed a person, but that it wasn't his fault. Eddie then leaves the room and James follows shortly after. He finds himself in a foul, destroyed prison with rust covering every inch of every surface and crevice. The material of the walls and floors are completely unrecognizable because of all the filth covering them, and water leaks from the ceiling. Nothing in this area could be remotely considered humane or natural, neither visually nor audibly. Industrial metallic clanks and screams of monsters fill up the entire prison. Metal, blood, and rust are the only distinguishable elements in the area. James comes across yet another hole. The incomprehensible depth that James is located in right now is realistically not possible, but still feels so real to him. He enters an elevator that loudly brings him down even further, excruciatingly slowly. He enters a room with a stone artifact that moves, that correspondingly moves the entire room behind it, along with holes on multiple sides. After James configures it in such a way that a walkway appears, he proceeds down it and opens the door on the other side.
You're alive! Maria, I thought that thing killed you.
He finds Maria behind steel prison bars. Maria seems completely unfazed with what occurred earlier, with no noticeable injuries. She talks to James in a manner completely unlike her, and even describing things that only James and his late wife may have any information about.
Are you confusing me with someone else?
You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel?
Maria?
She continues talking in this strange manner, confusing him and further rupturing his already unhinged mind. Maria seductively asks James to get on the other side of the bars in order for them to be able to make love. James leaves the room and tries to find a way to Maria, or whoever this person may be. He traverses through wet caves and long, labyrinth-like corridors ridden with limping monsters. On his way there, he enters a room where he again meets Angela, sitting on the floor next to a TV, this time with a large visceral monster standing next beside her. He unloads shotgun shells into the monster until it finally collapses. Angela gets up in a fit of rage and kicks the monster. She seems extremely distraught with what just occurred, but for different reasons than James originally thinks. Angela overprotectively reacts to James's sympathy and sees it as him trying to take advantage of her and throws a tantrum.
Right? I know what you're up to. It's always the same. You're only after one thing.
No, that's not true at all.
You don't have to lie. Go ahead and say it. Or you could just force me. Beat me up like you always did. You only care about yourself anyway.
She also reveals that she has some sort of relation or connection to the monster and claims that he always beat her up. This encounter between James and Angela is perhaps the most important when it comes to understanding her character. We can see that the way she interacts with James and the way she talks about male figures in her life signifies that she's been sexually and mentally abused by someone in her life, although we don't know who. She then scolds James and tells him that the reason Mary is dead is because of his uncaringness and that he perhaps fell in love with a different person. Angela quickly leaves the room. James then rushes out to find the room that Maria was sitting in. And after unlocking the gate that obstructed the pathway to the door of the room, he enters.
Maria? Maria? Maria, no! What happened to you?
To his horror, James finds Maria dead on the bed, with blood both soaking the sheets and covering most of her face. And now, after witnessing the death of Maria twice, is now in utter despair and has nothing else on his mind other than to get Mary. He wanders off to an outside area where he finds 3 open graves. On the epitaphs, he reads the names of Angela Orozco, Eddie Dombrowski, and finally, James Sunderland. The final grave with his own name on it has a deep hole, which he proceeds to jump into. An unhinged Eddie, fueled by a manic frenzy, is again waving his handgun around, shouting psychotic remarks, and how he'll go out of his way and kill anyone that makes fun of him. James stupidly says the wrong thing at the wrong time, and Eddie fires his handgun at him, hitting his shoulder. James reacts in self-defense, and fires his rifle at him. In the showdown between Eddie and James, Eddie exposes his inner deeper persona, and how he secretly enjoyed killing his bully's dog and watching it die. He then proceeds to tell James that they are both the same, seeing as how this town called them both. Eddie then continues to fire at James. Ultimately, James wins the gunfight and ends Eddie's life.
Eddie? Eddie? I killed a human being.
He stops for a minute, realizing what he has done and that he's taken another human's life, and once more, the thought of Mary crosses his mind. This time, he starts questioning his own sanity, asking if Mary really did die 3 years ago. Set to reach the final destination of James's and Mary's special place, the Lakeview Hotel. In the hotel, he again meets Laura, and this time, she gives James a letter. A letter that was written to Laura by Mary. James reads the letter. In it reads that she's gone off to a more beautiful place, and sees that Laura was supposed to turn 8 when the letter was written. After he asks her of her age, she responds with that she's turned 8 last week. James is now more hopeful of the fact that Mary may actually still be alive and here at the hotel. Laura realizes that she's dropped a second letter that she's gotten from Mary, and runs out of the room. After traversing through a ton of rooms in the giant hotel, he finally acquires the videotape that Mary and James had made, along with the key to the room she's supposedly waiting for James in. He slowly makes his way there, thinking to himself that his wife may actually be behind the door. And Mary's not there. In fact, nobody's in here. There is a resting chair with a TV and a VCR player in front of it. James loads up the videotape retrieved from the hotel lobby, sits down, and watches the recording made by Mary and him. The tape shows Mary, ill, sleeping on her bed, and as James comes into frame, proceeds to suffocate his wife with nothing but a pillow. The woman desperately shakes around, kicks, and tries to remove the pillow in order to breathe. James overpowers her and ultimately kills his sick, powerless wife with his own hands. Shocked and destroyed, overcome with the feeling of guilt, and betrayed by his own mind. Betrayed by an illusion James had subconsciously created to overcome the pain of knowing that the life of his significant other was taken by nothing but his own 2 hands. Laura enters the room and James tells her the truth.
You killer! Why'd you do it? I hate you! I want her back! Give her back to me! I knew it! You didn't care about her! I hate you, James! I hate you! I hate you! I hate you!
But no words can impact him anymore. Nothing can come close to hurting him as much as the truth, finally unraveled from the depths within his own mind. He collapses into the chair again, unwilling to even move, and suddenly the TV starts producing static, with a slight voice calling him by his name, Mary's voice. James immediately jumps out of the armchair and leaves the room, desperately running and trying to find his dead wife. The hotel is now in the same run-down, nightmarish state as the hospital and the prison were. He enters a room and listens to an audio recording of the conversation between him and Mary's doctor, when the news of her approaching death hit him.
You must be joking.
I'm very sorry.
But you're a doctor. It's your job to heal people. How can you just let her die?
Please, calm down. As her doctor, I promise I'll do what I can, but there's still no effective treatment for her condition.
How long does she have?
I'm afraid I'm not sure. 3 years at most, perhaps 6 months. It's impossible to say with certainty.
Serving like a remnant that was lost deep within his mind, purposely hidden deep down to not remind him of the pain he has to feel for the rest of his life. He keeps running, trying to reach the top floor of the hotel where Mary's supposed to be, desperately trying to cling on to a last hope that his wife, in fact, may still be alive. Through one of the doors he goes and finds Angela. Angela thanks James for saving her, but ultimately tells him that she doesn't deserve any pity, no matter what had happened to her in the past. James and Angela stand in a burning staircase with giant male carcasses plastered on the walls, depicting the bodies of 2 male figures in her life. She asks James for her knife back in order to commit suicide. James has had enough of people dying around him and refuses. Unable to cope with her actions, she turns around and walks up the stairs into her untimely demise. James walks out and into a room where he sees Maria suspended and chained up by 2 pyramid monsters. She screams for help and James begs the monsters to let her go. The monsters impale Maria with their spear, killing her once more. When James suddenly realizes, he's finally understood the purpose of Maria, someone that he subconsciously needed to keep causing him pain because of the constantly experienced guilt after killing his wife. His weak inner self had created this person to try to repent himself of his sin. The punishment he has endured, seeing a woman symbolizing his own wife being murdered in cold blood over and over again, has caused him enough suffering. Just enough. James gets up and has a final fight with the pyramid heads, loading all of his ammo into them, but to no avail. They chase James around the claustrophobic room until they both decide that James has accepted his fate and in a way has come to terms with his own sin. They both completely stop dead in their tracks, place their spears on the floor, and impale themselves through their throats. James then finds Mary standing on the top floor of the hotel. The Mary James knew and loved is dead, and James has finally accepted this.
Wrong again.
He realizes that this is yet another illusion created by the Maria figment and rejects her love. The illusionary Maria then turns into a large floating monster encased in a bed frame and attacks James. James defends himself, finally finishing her off, and as she falls to the floor, she murmurs James's name in a final attempt to seduce him. But James has already accepted his fate and fatally shoots the monster. Him and his dead wife meet for the last time, where he finally tells himself the truth to be able to come to terms with the subconscious.
James.
Forgive me.
I told you that I wanted to die, James. I wanted the pain to end.
That's why I did it, honey. I just couldn't watch you suffer. No. That's not the whole truth. You also said that you didn't want to die. The truth is, part of me hated you for taking away my life.
You killed me, and you're suffering for it. It's enough, James.
Mary?
James.
This is a final goodbye to Mary and his own life, as he drives his car with Mary's lifeless body beside him into the lake.
Now I understand the real reason I came to this town. I wonder, what was I afraid of? Without you, Mary, I've got nothing. Now we can be together.
Or maybe you think you can save me. Will you love me? Take care of me? Heal all my pain? That's what I thought.
Angela's mission of looking for her missing mother in Silent Hill begins with her troublesome past, as with the other characters. Depicted in multiple encounters is the sexual abuse she's endured from her family members, her father Thomas and her brother. This abuse has taken an immense toll on both her physical and mental health, and she inevitably takes action against them. As shown in a blood-soaked newspaper found by James in the game, Angela's father was found with multiple stab wounds, with the weapon not being on the side of the murder. In the second encounter with Angela, however, James finds Angela's knife, signifying that she herself was responsible for the killings of both her father and brother. Following the murders, Angela fled and came across Silent Hill. Her hatred towards both family members is seen in the burning staircase in the final encounter between James and Angela, where there are visible castration wounds on both of the male bodies that are plastered on the walls. Her abuse is also further signified by the way she talks to James after he kills the enemy in the labyrinth encounter with Angela. Having no trust in the male human, Angela sees James as someone who acts only by following after his sexual desires. Throughout the game, Angela tells James that she's been looking for her mother, referring to her as Mama multiple times. She may have been the only comfort she had in her life, even if she had refrained from stopping the abuse of her own daughter for reasons seemingly unknown. Ultimately, though, Angela's mother left the home, probably because she could not handle seeing her daughter's torture any longer. After the killings, like James, Angela's mental frenzy sent her to try to find any sort of comfort left in her life, and was ultimately drawn in by the town of Silent Hill. In the burning staircase, her delusions have entirely taken over, to the point where she confuses James for her mother, and after the delusions go away, she ultimately realizes that she won't be able to find her mother, or in this case, any other comfort in her life, and finally succumbs to her extreme suicidal ideations.
From now on, if anyone makes fun of me, I'll kill him! Just like that.
Drawn to Silent Hill by his troubled past and actions, Eddie Dombrowski is severely disturbed and abused, so throughout his interactions with James, he tells us about the way he's been bullied his entire life and how self-conscious and useless he feels because of it. Having not being taken seriously for even a moment in his life, he's ultimately pushed to doing unspeakable things, which started with abusing animals, such as the dog of his bully. The degradation of his person eventually leads to him murdering people, and in the end tells James that he'll kill the next person to make fun of him, which also leads to him attacking James in their final encounter. His character seems to also be tainted by an excessive eating disorder, which could have been created as a coping mechanism as a result of his terrible life. And like James, Eddie is gradually met with the same fate, with his mental sanity snapping and placing him in a nightmarish state known as the other side or the otherworld. And throughout the game, Eddie is seen alongside corpses, which symbolize Eddie's bullies throughout his life, and them being dead shows his ever-growing desire for revenge against them, stripping his humanity away more and more for each killing.
Killing a person ain't no big deal.
Eddie is a perfect example in the story as someone whom the town has devoured completely and leaving him beyond repair. His death was accompanied by a psychotic fit of rage and hatred, and it has not in any way rid him of his sins, leaving his lifeless body without any repentance and with a tormented soul which in the end couldn't be saved.
Could Mary really be there? Is she really alive? Waiting for me?
James Sunderland's mental descent throughout the story isn't sporadic or unexplainable. His subconscious is tainted long before the story begins with the death of his wife Mary, A man that's existence solely depended on his significant other's well-being, which was snatched away in a moment because of his actions in order to stop his wife's suffering, can easily be deteriorated by the feeling of overwhelming guilt, as we do see in the story. As horrifying and depressing the fact that Mary's death is in the hands of James is, it in no way signifies that James is a murderer of sorts, well, apart from the literal sense. His humanity is shown multiple times throughout the story, like where James kills Eddie and is still horrified by the fact that he's killed another human being, even if it was solely in self-defense. The other instance is where he's shown the tape of him killing Mary with a pillow. He wails in utter despair and shows that he truly regrets doing something of the fashion, and that the only reason for his doing is of a sympathetic manner, wanting to take the burden of suffering from the illness away from his wife. Laura shouting to James that he's a killer is another instance of the town's surroundings trying to pry open his soul even further by inserting these thoughts into his mind and strengthening his feelings of guilt and desire for punishment. Another thing we get to see in James's psyche is himself disagreeing with his own inner subconscious. Maria is a construct perhaps created by the location of Silent Hill itself. However, it still depends on what the person's innermost desires consist of. Maria may very well be an image of a perfect woman in James's eyes. This could have been something that James has thought about for a long time and maybe further explained by Angela's dialogue with James later on in the story.
Liar! I know about you. You didn't want her around anymore. You probably found someone else.
That's ridiculous. I never.
In particular, James's answer to her statement seems awfully uncertain, as if he's himself boggled and wondering if that may be true or not. This undertone is also shown when James is eager to get to the other side of the prison bars when he met Maria in the labyrinth to attain a sexual relationship with her. Although this doesn't really explain much since he hasn't seen Mary in multiple years, weakening the explanation that James would cheat on her, but nevertheless is a pretty interesting point. Maria is very similar to Mary when it comes to her facial features and voice, but however, compared to Mary, she's very sexual in nature in her actions, with her background being working at the strip club called Heaven's Night. She's very sexually extroverted by the way she talks and behaves, and this may serve as something that James has seen as an additional desire in Mary, apart from her distinct facial features. Something noteworthy to think about when pondering Maria's actions towards James is her slight immaturity and her mood swings in some cases. This is a way to portray James's late wife's behaviors following the diagnosis of her illness. These behavioral patterns serve to further punish and torture James and to further strengthen his feelings of guilt. There are multiple pieces of evidence to support the fact that the figment of Maria was created solely for James. We never once in the story see Maria directly be in the same area as another person other than James. As an example, we have the bowling alley, where Maria tells James that she would like to stay outside instead of going in and meeting Eddie and Laura. This could very well point to the aforementioned fact that she was created by Psyche, or Silent Hill itself, in order to be punished for his sin. The purpose of the town Silent Hill is to torment James, in order to either help him save his humanity by being able to repent his own sins, or to entirely destroy him, which ultimately is decided by what's left of his sanity, and in this case depending on what actions are done by the player, hence there also being multiple alternative endings to the game. The story may end in different conclusions, depending on what kind of behavior James has when it comes to managing various aspects of his journey. This was the ending I got in my first playthrough of the game, and it stuck with me by far the most. For me, personally, it felt like the true ending to the story. Of course, that is only my own personal take. The game has no particular ending that may be deemed as the true resolution, and Team Silent, the developers of the game, haven't deemed any ending more canon than the other. Masahiro Ito, the designer of the game, has himself stated that he finds this particular ending to be the most satisfactory to him personally, but that it is still completely open to the player's interpretation. In order for James' story to end this way, the player has to refrain from letting James heal himself too often, as well as making sure he examines some specific items such as Angela's knife, which he finds after meeting her in front of the mirror in the broken down apartments. This ending depicts James ultimately bringing himself to his own demise as a way to bury himself along with the sin he's been battling with, in a way signifying that he's come to terms with the truth, albeit being unable to cope with living after. Another ending to the game is where James and Laura leave Silent Hill, and is the most bittersweet of the bunch, as some would say. Like in the previous ending, James has accepted that his significant other died in his arms, but has deep within come to terms with his inner psyche and finally is able to forgive himself. The player has to be the least self-destructive when it comes to James's health, making sure that he's in a somewhat stable condition throughout the game. After reading Mary's letter for the final time, James and Laura leave the forsaken town and go on to live the rest of their lives. Whether happy or terrible ones is again left up to interpretation. The Maria ending is perhaps one of the most somber endings to the story, and in order to achieve this one, the player has to make sure that Maria is taken care of throughout their journey, ignoring her numerous deaths. James has to make sure she takes the least amount of damage possible in their fights with the creatures of the town. The player also needs to make sure not to run too far away from Maria and leave her behind. In this ending, James leaves Silent Hill with Maria. Maria merely being a figment is not something that is explicitly established in the game. Most people do, however, have some kind of shared thought process about the ending and that it in a way serves as the worst of the bunch. James leaving the town with the woman shows that nothing has changed after the events in Silent Hill. His psyche now left even more deranged, leading him to continue living the lie. With him being nowhere close to facing his subconscious that repeatedly tortured him, it has now evidently swallowed him whole. Surreal and dreamlike voice acting,
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
whether intentional or not, along with the musical pieces, create the perfect atmosphere for every single moment of the game. The scores, combined with the disconnected voice acting, create a sense of whatever the scenes in question are trying to portray immensely well. But what Silent Hill 2 does perfectly is keeping that balance between using musical tracks and letting the player dreadfully traverse areas in a deafening silence, interrupted only by screeches or ambient industrial noises. This silence plays a vital role in the game's sound design and is perhaps even more noteworthy and important than the soul-wrenching melodies created for the game. In the making of interview for the game, Akira Yamaoka, the lead composer and sound designer of the game, states, "The job of a sound designer is not just to create sounds, we also have to know how to use silence." With this balance, Yamaoka has perfectly captured what creates a sense of dread and unease in players. Without Yamaoka's brilliant sound design, the game's atmosphere would have been entirely different and in my opinion is one of, if not the best aspect of this game. The game being filled with surreal and hallucinatory imagery makes it hard for the player to truly determine whether or not what James is seeing is real. What reality is in this case is pretty much impossible to determine. His journey throughout the game might truly be what his psyche perceives his average life as. Questioning about the reliability of memory and the subjectivity of perception, exploring the ways that our memories and experiences shape our understanding of the world, the foggy and seemingly empty roads and intersections of the town symbolizing the border between a mere and unfulfilling existence, a state of simply being, and a manic frenzy. Unforeseen, sudden, impactful events that make a mind go haywire transpire into a mind entering the so-called other side, a place where one's mind suffocatingly begs to be freed from its chaotic entrapment. What we witness in the game is a story of a ruptured mind truly falling into a state of despair, which ultimately results in one of two things: redemption or condemnation. An extraordinarily well-crafted atmosphere riddled with themes and underlying tones as such make this game much more than the average survival horror experience and transcend the story into much, much more than that. Team Silent's perfect encapsulation of what a person's psyche consists of makes this game nothing short of that of a masterpiece. Sexuality, repression, redemption, and forgiveness, detachment from reality, all key themes that all collide in such a way to create one of the most fascinating pieces of media we have, showing us an awfully beautiful portrait of the mind.